Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Mindrise podcast. I'm your host, Bailey Fruman, psychotherapist, coach, and author of Own Your Power, as well as founder at Mindrise. Today, we are going to be joined by Katie DePaola, CEO of Inner Glow Circle and best-selling author of At Least You Look Good. Katie has been featured in Time, Forbes, and Entrepreneur, as well as appearing on over 40 podcasts. She lives in Washington, D.C., where she serves on the board for Beau's Effort, the foundation created in memory of her late brother, Beau. So today we're going to be talking about how we all go through hard times, but why not glow through them? Katie learned the hard way that life isn't just about looking good, it's about feeling good too. On this episode, Katie shares her inspiring story of overcoming sickness and loss, as well as creating her 5 rules for life, which include giving up off the table and it's this or something better always. So throughout our lives, we experience many crossroads. We all know this, moments in time where we either get to stay stuck or decide to rise. A lot of life doesn't always go as planned, but your job is to rise anyway. I invite you to dive in and join me in this conversation with Katie DePaola as we talk about how to rise through life's greatest challenges and even turn them into your greatest opportunities. Katie, I'm so happy to have you on with us. Katie is one of those people that she enters the room and you know that she is there. Right? Whether that is, at least in my experience, we first met on the beaches of Tulum, right? Mm-hmm. And both being in the coaching world and being in a really sacred space of connection with other entrepreneurs, having really open-hearted conversations, and having met Katie and learning more about her story, I couldn't help but create a friendship together and look at the perspective of we create this life of ours. And Katie was an awesome demonstration of what it means to create your life based on your inner narrative. So I'm so excited to have you here talking to us, not only about your journey, but she just happens to have an amazing book out, glowing through what you go through. My mouth is just not talking today. So Katie has a great book out to share even more about her story. But Katie, I want to toss it over to you because again, people look at Instagram and they're like, oh, the hair, the confidence, she must have it all figured out. And it's been a journey.
Yeah, it's all fake. No, I'm just kidding. It's funny that, first of all, I'm so happy to be here and not a bad place to meet on the beach in Tulum, right? It's funny though, because when you say that I've created my life based on my inner narrative, I actually would personally say that I've tried to create my life not based on my inner narrative, and that I've had to really work to shift the inner narrative because so many challenging things happened in my life back to back. But what I will say is that the work that I had done and have done and continue to do around personal development and personal growth and mindset and specifically resilience are what I think have allowed me to, glow through what I go through and keep glowing through what I go through. So yeah, you're right. And my book is called At Least You Look Good, Learning to Glow Through What You Go Through. And it tells the story of my own journey in learning how to glow through what I go through. And what I mean by that is overcome and also work with whatever life gives you, because sometimes life serves us things that we are not in our plans, right? And so how do you actually take your biggest challenges and turn them into your greatest opportunities? That's been something that I've been trying to figure out over the past, almost 10 years now.
Well, you make a great point because it is the difference between the narrative that we have inside of our head, the one that we struggle with, and the one that we want to create in that new playbook. And I think that a lot of that comes from us meeting those challenges and then deciding, how do we want to navigate those? So you're right. It is about seeing the challenges that you've faced, which, and I hope you feel comfortable sharing with us some of your story, which again, everyone can read, and At Least You Look Good. it's a matter of, you went through these things, but they didn't define what you were capable of. Maybe they defined in a moment, and I'd
Right.
love to your perspective. Maybe they defined how you felt at that moment, but and certainly there's moments when they put us on pause. And sometimes that pause is exactly what we need as we're, rolling through that pause
Yeah.
to like reflect and pivot. But, in your experience, some of those challenges that helped you to really know like what you were made of, right? And show up. How are you able to like understand? And I don't want to go as far as being cheesy as to say like look on the bright side, but how did you not let it hold you back, but instead like have you move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really passionate about looking at possibility. And so in my book, I talk about my 5 rules of life. And one of them is to ask what's possible, not what's probable. And so often we look at what's probable, like what's likely to happen or what's happened in the past. Or if you're someone who's experienced trauma, even like your trauma brain, your PTSD is going to really quickly short circuit you to what's happened in the past. And so like we often have to work really hard to create a life that's full of possibility and not just probability. And that was my journey. And like, that's still my journey. I'm always asking, like, well, what's actually possible? Right. Because, whether I'm sitting in meetings or doing an interview or whatever the case might be, we're constantly in conversation with people, and people tend to look at what's probable, right? They look at what's likely to happen, whether I'm in a sales conversation or something. And so I'm always pushing people and pushing myself to look at, okay, yes, I hear you. And what's actually possible? Like, what would be your greatest level of want? So I say that GLOW means greatest level of want. It's an acronym. And so if you could have anything, if the world was totally open, if you could not fail, what would be your greatest level of want? What would be the thing that you want for yourself, others, and the world? And so using these, I guess you could call them mindset hacks, but using these lenses to look at your life and the world in an elevated way, right? How do we get above what's happening in the moment? Not totally step over it. Like, I'm really cautious about bypassing, but how do we get elevated so that we can see things from a higher perspective and zoom out and look at life from that focal point?
Right. Looking from those lenses, that 30,000 foot view and
Right,
what's possible.
exactly.
But Kate, like, why do you think that we limit ourselves? Why do you think that we create these glass ceilings, so to speak, or even determine what's possible based on our past experiences, especially when they were misgivings or mistakes?
I mean, honestly, this is something I'm saying now, but I really think it's just science. I think that that's just how our brains work. I think that our brains are um, often, the pathways that are carved out are the ones that are more based on probability or even more negative. And so we have to start, paving different pathways in order for us to think differently so that we can then create different results and have different lives.
Right. Well, it's interesting, when we talk about the science of it, you're right. It is that our neural pathways are wired a certain way, and that is to maintain safety, right? So we're always seeking safety. So if I keep imagining the worst possible scenario, then I'm almost prepared. This like takes us back to our caveman days, but we're not much differently biologically wired than we were in those days, because the
Mm-hmm.
truth is like we were waiting for a saber-toothed tiger to attack and we're still waiting for like the other shoe to drop, so to speak. So I think that in some ways you're totally right. We limit ourselves by way of like science. But what do you think are some of the best tools that we either have at hand and we're not using, or like we could access and like maybe access them a little bit more to start thinking outside of that box? Like, what's allowed you to start imagining what's possible And how do other people do that as well?
Yeah. I mean, if we want to talk about like tools and practices, the practice that I am pretty religious about is journaling. And I use the artist way as my methodology. So I do 3 pages longhand in the morning by hand. And that for me, like just getting to the bottom of my internal dialogue, kind of taking out the trash in terms of like those very surface level thoughts of like, I don't wanna, like, I gotta do this. And, I'm someone who has a lot of that. I guess some people do and some people don't, but I have no problem admitting like I have a lot of resistance and I have a lot of like, stuff. And so in order to like be my brilliant self that exists beyond that, I have to actually have some sort of practice for, taking the trash out and taking that top layer away so that I can get to the bottom to get to the good stuff. So for me, writing and journaling, I know it's really simple. I'm not a complicated person in terms of my practices or how I live my life. I don't have the patience for that, but I think it's also like really, I have these 5 rules of life that I want to share. They're super fast, but also just when we talk about mindset, having mantras, like having, one-liners to fall back on. So the 5 rules of life are: one, life gets to get better and better. So this idea that like, regardless of what happens, life as a whole, right, as an average, could get better and better. So for some background, so you don't think I'm just like talking out of my butt, my brother passed away in 2015. Right before that, I had gotten diagnosed with chronic neurological Lyme disease. They said that I had brain damage as well as damage to multiple organs. I was engaged at the time, and my ex and I had a major, like almost like a divorce, because we were involved in business together. And so it was like this back to back thing. And I don't mean to make light of any of it. It's extremely difficult to talk about this period of my life, especially the loss of my youngest brother. It's devastating. And it's part of my life. It's part of my truth. It's part of like what actually happened. And so to be faced with that and then be, looking at these rules, right? Like life gets to get better and better. Is it possible that life for me, my family, my other brother can get better? Yes. And that's what I've learned and that's what I've stuck to. Will it be the same? No, of course not. Do I miss my brother every single day? Absolutely. But life as a whole, I am on a mission to prove to myself and others can keep getting better. So I think that science plays such a big part in it, Bailey, like you said. And I also think that, if you look at like I've been taking a class in neuroscience, and if you look at just like neurons, right? If we want to be like super dorky about it, if you have more negative than positive, you're going to be operating at a negative overall. So do we have to work extra hard when our lives have been hard to not only balance but overcome with positive? Yes, absolutely. And that's what I think that it requires, is that we create a life that is so good, that is so juicy, that is so beautiful, that the positive starts to outweigh the negative, and then you're at a net positive. Like that's what I mean when I say it's just science.
Right. And you are right. Life does get better and better. And what are the tools that we're using to measure? Because Katie, for that period of your life that you navigated, one can say like, how would you be able to say that? Look at everything that you faced, but you're 100% right when you look at, okay, the bigger picture of life. So yeah. I think in that perspective, it lends to the acronym for G.L.O.W, where it's what's possible. So give us your other 4 rules, because there's Katie's 5 rules for life, and you guys can find that in her book. At least you look good. And give us, what's the other 4?
Okay, so rule number 2 is to take giving up off the table. I think in order to have the life that you want, you have to take giving up off the table. And if that's not an option, you'll start to see the options that there are. Number 3, ask what's possible, not what's probable. We touched on that. Number 4, it's this or something better always. So I'm someone who gets super attached to things. Like I'll have a vision, or I'll have an idea, or I'll have a way that things need to go, and I will grip onto that thing like crazy. And I'm not ashamed to admit that, because I think that truth is where we find healing. And a lot of people are like that. I've coached thousands of women, and a lot of women and men operate like that, where they get attached. And when you attach it, you suck all the energy out of it. So telling myself it's this or something better is massively freeing. And then the last one, number 5, is what's meant for me can't miss me. So I talk about this in my book, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I've been diagnosed with a few things, but OCD is one of them. And I can get obsessive, like super obsessive about things. And remembering that what's meant for me can't miss me, right? There's not just like one chance. At the same time, we have to show up. We have to show up for ourselves, for our lives, for our businesses, for our partners, for our kids, for our dreams. And I do think that if you hide too much, or if you don't acknowledge your own greatness, then sure, at some point you can start to miss opportunities. But if you show up, what's meant for you can't miss you. At least that's what I believe.
Well, and that speaks to faith. I mean, so often I think that we give up on faith in some capacity, and we only kind of look at like, what is the hard evidence? And that
Right.
goes to the glass ceiling as well, right? But what allows us to have faith is in many ways that like understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's meant for me, like can't miss me. So
Mm-hmm.
remembering to put our intentions out there. Like I find so often that even in my own experience, I've had this happen, but in conversations, like we get on this like autopilot where we're just on the hamster wheel of like, this is what I do every day. And we forget about setting intentions, and we forget about visualization. We forget about manifesting. And therefore, like, I think that it actually turns down our ability to have faith. I think it like kind of dulls it a little bit.
Yeah.
When we start to come into that concept, your rule number 5, I think it gives a beautiful opportunity to kind of dust off our faith and kind of let that light shine a little bit more, let that glow when we're like, okay, what's
Yeah.
meant for me can't miss me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Two of the other rules for life at that, because you're right, we covered number 3, but 2 of the other rules for life, I especially want to talk about number 2. Well, I want to talk about 2 and 4 too, as well, but I want to talk about number 2. The first episode of the podcast that we did was surrender versus giving up. And that was because like as a team, we had a year-long discussion. I mean, anybody that would be passed in the grocery store, we'd be like, so what's the difference between surrendering and giving up? So I love your perspective, your take on this, because rule number 2 dictates there's no giving up. So what's the difference? How does
between surrender and giving up? Such a great conversation, a lifelong conversation, truly. I try to pay attention to like nuance inside of me. I try to listen to my body, which for me is difficult because I've had a lot of trauma. But part of healing that is acknowledging that my body still talks to me, and that I can feel nuance in my body. So for those some people are going to totally get what I'm saying, and then some people are going to be, what are you talking about, Katie? So what I mean is feeling my intuition, like not only thinking intuitively, but feeling intuitively, and not just through my emotion, but like literally in my body. So feeling a pull towards something, or a pull away, a push away from something, and paying attention to that nuance, and then acknowledging it. And one of the ways for me that I've done a lot of healing is through listening and actually like doing the thing that my body says. Because a lot of times, we're go-getters. I know you're super like this, Bailey. Like we want to be all like, yes, I surrender. And like, let's let life guide us. But at the same time, we want to work hard, and we want things to happen. And we do get pulled into that, like, make things happen vibe, right? What does it mean to make something happen? versus like, I can't just like sit on my meditation pillow and expect things to fall from the sky, right? So where is that in between sweet spot? And what I would say is like, it really is a sweet spot. It's a sweet spot between surrender and giving up. And I think giving up, you can feel in your body. Like, it's sort of like this, F this, like, I'm over it, like, da 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 da. And typically that's not, if you're bringing that energy, there's like too much emotion in this space still, right? And so there's more work to do there to get to a place of surrender. And if you're ready to be done with something in your life, like let's say you have a 9 to 5 job and you're like, you know what, I'm ready to be done, I'm ready to like give this up. You want to understand where you're giving up from, right? And maybe you're saying, you know what, I'm surrendering because I really feel like everything that I'm experiencing day to day is pointing me to something greater. So I think that like often when like, I think that when you surrender, perhaps you surrender to something greater, right? Like, so I surrender my own will or my own fears or my own golden handcuffs, and I surrender to something greater, like the greater vision of my life. Let's say you're trying to like launch something and get it off the ground and it just feels so hard. When are you giving up versus when is giving up? When is it a give up that's more of like a, you know, a well-dressed giving up, a surrender giving up? I think you have to listen, like, I think you have to pay attention to your own system, and again, like really understanding, okay, I feel like I'm being told something here and this isn't working for a reason because I'm being pointed in a different direction or I'm being pointed to something greater, rather than just like, you know what, screw it, it's too hard. It's too hard. I can't. I think it's not like this, like simple, like this is this and this is that for surrender and giving up. I think it's very nuanced for each person.
Right. So here's my question, right? And you gave us one small glimpse, and Katie tells so many great stories in her book. But in that period of your life, your brother passes, you're navigating Lyme's disease, you're going through a breakup that's equivalent of a divorce, where, you know, the business is also involved that, you know, you created from the ground up. Like, Katie, what had you keep going? Why didn't you just wave the white flag? Because with love, if you gave up, nobody would have blamed you. Everyone would be like, oh yeah, like she's dealing with a full deck here, right? She has a full hand of troubles or challenges, right? However we're defining them. But like, why didn't you wave the white flag? And how didn't you wave the white flag?
Yeah. I thought about giving up a lot. I thought about giving up my business. I thought about giving up like on life, you know, to the tune of either like, I'm just not going to participate in this whole life thing and just like be bedridden, because I was bedridden for a period of time, and not, you know, do the things I feel like I'm meant to do in my life, to like, and I know this is really extreme, but like I got to a point where I was in so much physical and emotional pain that I was like praying God would take me in my sleep. Like, it was really bad. It was really, really bad. And it's so hard to even talk about that because I'm so different now and I feel so different. And I still think life is incredibly hard. I don't think they tell you this enough. Like, I'm just really debating as I think about having children about how honest to be with them, that, you know, life is not a cakewalk at all. And it's really incredible and full of a lot of magic. And there's so much to discover. And the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And it's really this interesting game or this interesting journey. And so I think that I've been studying this. This is what my book unpacks, is like, why? Like, what inside of me kept going and how? And you really like walk with me. Here's my book. For those of you who can see me.
Yay.
But you really
Absolutely, our
walk with
YouTubers.
me. Yeah, for our YouTubers. You really walk with me through this journey of surviving. And I think the thread in terms of my own resilience is just that thing we talked about in the beginning, which is like, I kept thinking, believing, considering, being curious about, visioning that things could get better. Not that they would. I had no freaking clue, but I really was like, could it get better? Over 30 doctors told me I'd never get rid of my Lyme disease. I'm Lyme free. I just had a blood test the other day. Everything's negative. Like, it's been negative for almost 3 years now. I mean, 30 doctors told me that I couldn't get rid of it. And everyone that you talk to who has Lyme disease basically will tell you it's incurable, that you can only put it into remission. But that's not the case for me. And so it's like, I kept thinking with each of these things, right? So it started with Lyme, and I was like, is it possible? Is it possible that there is one doctor out there that I could somehow get to that could cure my Lyme disease? And I thought about all the stories of things that, people who have had such resilience and have made the impossible possible. And I thought, well, why can't I be? I mean, I'm no different than them. Why can't I be like that? And then with Bo, I mean, God, losing my brother died from an accidental drug overdose. Like, that's incredibly tragic. It was completely unexpected. I was out of town. I woke up to a phone call, you need to come home. Like, it was, all the details are in the book if you want to, the real story, but it was completely earth shattering. But what I considered, I talk about this in the book too, was, is it possible to have a relationship with my brother that's better with him on the other side? And I've had all these like magical, mystical experiences communicating with Bo. There's a whole chapter called He's Not Dead, where I talk about these, like, sort of this evidence that, from my perspective, he's still alive in a realm. I believe in like the unseen worlds. And so I really got to just, like, anything someone says now, or anything someone had, was saying to me during this period that was not something I liked, I got to say, I don't know, maybe like it's actually possible that that person's wrong, or that that's true for them. It doesn't have to be true for me.
It sounds to me like that magic, and then not foo-foo magic, but just like the real deal magic that resides in possibility, was one of the key ingredients that when all the cards were stacked against you to wave the white flag and to give up, that like was the burning ember that resided within inside you, was possibility.
Yeah.
One of the other things that that you talk about in your rules of life, right? That rule number 4. And I'm super curious, like, when we talk about the emotional space, right? And we talk about attachment, and how it relates to what we attach to, what we give lots of emotion to. Because I'm not an advocate for like, let's numb or push our feelings in the closet here. Because so often we do and we soldier on. But what is your relationship when it comes to like seeing the emotions and being able to hold them at arm's length and say, oh, I'm still emotionally charged about this? And like also the relationship to attachment, like what we do grab onto and why we do that.
Oh, I'm not the right person to ask this question to. I'm a double Scorpio with like a lot of fire in my chart. I have a lot of passion, period. I think that can be incredibly fueling. I also, look, I'm really honest, I struggle with attachment. I get attached to things. That whole thing you were asking about surrender, I mean, I've got an answer for you, but in my everyday life, like, it's a constant practice. I mean, I'm not one of those people that's like, I wrote a book and so I figured things out. No, I wrote a book as I was figuring things out, that everyone who, I've spoken to about the book says, you are incredibly honest. I was just talking to an old client the other day who is super brilliant and I really respect. And she was like, Katie, you were just so honest in your book. And I'm talking to her and I'm like, can you just tell me like what exactly that means? Because I think I just told the truth and I don't know what else anyone would do, right? Is tell the truth. But I'm not here to say like, oh, there's this easy way to become unattached. to me, it's this constant practice of, again, like repeating these mantras and presencing yourself to this or something better. Like, I know I'm an intuitive person. I know that I'm guided towards this thing, but I also totally know and welcome that Bailey could have a better idea when I talk to her and she's like, no, do it this way. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to consider that. Or that God or the powers that be could push me in a different direction. And so, that's why I say, like, it's about surrendering to the greatest, the glow, the greatest level of want. Like, what is most desirable here? And that's where we keep pushing ourselves up into possibility.
Right, right, right. And I love the humanness of it, because you're right. We write the book because this is what I struggled with. Even with my book, Own Your Power, that's one of the things I said. I'm like, I didn't write that book because I was like the most powerful person. It's because I had to figure that shit out. And
Right.
therefore, in figuring it out, I was like, all right, well, here's what I'm using. I don't know if it's going to work for you, but here,
Sure.
you can give it a whirl. So at least in my perspective from, reading your book and saying the same thing, like, wow, super honest. And you're like, okay, but I just told the truth. I think sometimes it's like we do look at that, or at least I did, like, here's the book, here's the truth. And there's like literally no detail that Katie spared. So if you're like, hearing parts of the story today and you're like, oh, I wonder how that turned out, or I wonder how that happened, she's going to tell you in exact detail every bit of it, because that is her truth and her journey. But Katie, like, let's get real. And I know I've been guilty of it. I'm sure you've been guilty of it. A lot of times people navigate life like having this nice wrapped package, right? Wrapped in the bow, nothing to see here, everything is fine. So when your client, and how I felt as well, was like, well, damn, that was really honest. And you're like, well, how? Because I'm just told the truth. It's because we think that we've just wrapped in the bow and everything is fine and there's nothing to see, but there is so much depth that resides within the truth.
Right.
And that, to me, is how we connect on such a human level, is that level of vulnerability of, I don't
Yeah.
have it all figured out, but here's the story so far. Because that's also part of it. Like, with
Sure.
love, my friend, this is not your last book. There's definitely more where that came from, whether you're planning it or not. Because it's the book of our life. It's the
Right.
journey and the story.
Well, it's funny that you say that. I think this is a great little story or anecdote, and it's a great example for our listeners or our viewers. But there's 3 sections in the book: body, beauty, and boys. And I talk about how those have been my greatest teachers. And boys is not just about romantic, but it is about romantic. So there's a couple romance stories happening in the book. And God, when you and I met, I probably would have been going through this, but there was a part of the third part of the book all about boys. The way that I wrote it, the way that I connected the pieces together, because there's a lot of like poetry in the book. Like, there is actually some poetry, but there's a lot of poetry in how it's written and how the stories tied together, and the death of my brother and the coming of another life, and just like all these different little pieces. But there was a storyline that kind of got like in a romantic relationship. And I had written this entire section, and as an author, I had written this entire section of the book, God, probably 80 pages, that like where every part of it was kind of pointing to this one ending. And then kaputs, the relationship ended. And I was like, I went to the Ritz. Was it the Ritz? I went to the Ritz Carlton in Georgetown one day and brought my laptop and all my shit. And I was like, okay, I'm going to rewrite this entire thing. I sat there for 8 hours and rewrote 80 pages, which is a feat. I mean, writing a book is not easy. And then rewriting is like challenging, because you have to really surrender and release attachment and throw stuff out. Like, the delete button is like sort of your best friend and also sort of your greatest enemy when you're writing a book, because like every time you delete something, you feel like you're like losing a part of your soul, but also it's like freeing space. So I'm sitting in the Ritz and I'm just like, aggressively sitting in the Ritz, hammering this thing out. And I rewrote the story. And I had this moment of realization that was so poignant, where I was like, oh my God, like, this is like a lot of work. And also I just did it. And this is what happens when we have to rewrite our lives. Like, and I'm not even talking about the broken engagement. That story was done. This was like a whole nother love that had come back into my life. And I was like, so really, truly, probably attached. I was so attached because he had known my brother and yada, yada, yada. And y'all can read the juice in the book. But, it was like this really very clear example of what happens to us as humans when we get too attached, and we have to rewrite, and it takes a lot of time, and we can't always do it in 8 hours at the Ritz-Carlton. Sometimes it takes longer, and sometimes you're not in a nice hotel. At least I wasn't always. So yeah, sometimes we have to rewrite our lives.
Well, and Katie, that goes exactly full circle in the conversation, right back to the narrative, because sometimes we need to rework our inner narrative.
Yeah.
Sometimes our inner narrative is like some broke ass Motel 6 in the middle of nowhere, because that's like what's happening in our head. Like sometimes, like I call my brain like the bad neighborhood in Compton. Like sometimes it's bad up there, right? And I'm having like drive-by thinking. It's really bad because we do the work that we do many times because we've had to sort all the shit that we've navigated too. And
Sure.
then, right. So when you're talking about the rewrite, the first word that came to my mind was the narrative. It's
right.
So sometimes we need to take
right.
hold of the narrative, because I mean, and I wasn't there, but correct me if I'm wrong, another person who navigated everything that you navigated at that same part of your life could have easily said, forget this, or made it mean something about them, or talked about their worthiness, or gave up. Like all of those things, no one would have blamed you for. But you chose to write the narrative differently in your mind, despite those struggles. And then from that new narrative, continue to imagine possibility, continue to just grow and glow, right? With that greatest level of want, despite the challenge. So that's when I talk about narrative, like you nailed it. You have the whole thing written out and you're like, shit, I have to rewrite this. Like I've got to.
Well, and I can, right? Like
Yes,
it's possible.
yes,
like
yes.
I get a choice, and I'm sitting there writing, pissed and hurt about the breakup, and realizing like, I call it the glow in the dark in the book. I say like the glow in the dark is more than the silver lining. It's the thing to get excited about before it even happens. And that's what I really believe in. Like we talk about silver lining a lot, but I see it as like the glow in the dark, because it's really dark sometimes, but there's this tiny, tiny, tiny little glow. It's like that song, "This Little Light of Mine, I'm gonna let it shine." And there's this tiny glow, and it's just a little flicker. And you really have to like say to yourself, what is the opportunity on the other side of the pain? Not like, what am I 100% sure? I talk about this in the book. I'm like, it's so easy when you're dating someone and you meet someone else while you're dating someone that you're trying to break up with. Or like when you're like in and out on the relationship, but then you meet somebody else. It's so easy because it's like life's like here, right? But like that's not usually how it is. Usually we're asked to leap with a blank space on the other side. And so your brain, your narrative, your internal dialogue has to be filling in that blank space of, no, I'm not going to fall through a dark hole. I'm going to land, but what are all the beautiful things that is possible for me to land on? And I started to think, well, is it possible for me to get married, even though I had this terrible, terrible engagement, and that really stopped me in my tracks. Like I'm never dating again. And I didn't for over a year. Like, is it possible that there could be somebody out there that's right for me, that's great for me, that I, with all the messed up relationships I've had, could have a healthy relationship? Sure, it's possible. Anything's possible. And we like say that all the time, right? I know you have so many conversations with people where you're like, so what's actually possible? And they're like, anything's possible. And it's like, okay, but what actually is possible? And we talk about possibility a lot, but what's the path to possibility? because you have to work for possibility. It doesn't just show up.
Right. You nailed it. And possibility isn't just like I glued some things on my vision board. Here goes nothing. Right. That's
Right.
not exactly how it works. I love that phrase, pray and move your feet, because it's like, yes, of course we need both
Yeah.
energies. And I find that to be very like the dance between the masculine and the feminine that resides within us all. Right. That
Sure.
feminine is like, what's possible, right? That vision.
Mhm.
And the masculine's like, well, we got to move our feet. We got to get shit done. Like we got to make
Right.
it happen. And so for you, as you look upon a new year and how each one of our new years sets us up for what's to happen in the future, what is possible for Katie DePaola? Like, what is on the horizon for you next?
Oh gosh, I have so many things in the works. I am thinking about my next book. I already have a title that I'm not sharing yet, but I'm looking at that and what I want to do the same and what I want to do differently and when I want to do it and all that. I'm taking some classes. Like I said, I'm really very, very curious about and wanting to understand the science and the nature of resilience, like what actually happens. Like when you ask me, like, why didn't you give up? I gave you all these answers, but the reality is I'm not totally sure. I did presence myself to possibility and I did all these things that I'm telling you, but I want to know deeper because I'm so obsessed with the depths of life, but I want to understand deeper, what has someone give up versus someone not give up? What is the key to resilience? So studying some more on my own and continuing to grow IGC and get my book out there. I'm doing some speaking for um, uh, some hospitals, like in their mental health, to help raise funds for those hospitals for their programming. So lots of things.
Nice. But isn't that also part of life is like, okay, here's what's laid out for me going forward. And it's not going to look that clean. Like you said, life is hard. It's
Yeah.
not going to look that clean going forward, but like when the ship is leaving the harbor, okay, I'm pointed in that direction. So
Mhm.
whether I have to zig and zag in order to get there, that's where I'm headed. And if I get more information as I go along the way and I need to pivot from there, then that's what I do.
Yeah.
Book for you to check out if you haven't already, Grit by Dr. Angela Duckworth. Are you familiar with
Yeah,
that?
I am. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's a good one to talk about some of those components within resilience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course, everybody's favorite, Brene Brown, looking at that. But I'm with you, really like understanding how we're wired that determines like that space of resilience.
Yeah. I want to like talk nerdy. Like I want like to know about the neurons and what's happening and how they're kind of battling it out because we know that certain things can help, right? Like meditation or medication
Mhm.
or support or, people are really negatively impacted by isolation, but which has been huge during COVID. And so how do all of these things actually change our brain chemistry? That's what I'm
Mhm.
so fascinated by.
Absolutely. I love it. I feel like we could talk for hours as usual.
Yeah.
But so for everyone who's looking for Katie on the interwebs, and we can find at least You Look Good on Amazon, right?
Mhm.
Where else are you hanging out on the internet so that we can find you and follow you and check out all things Katie?
Yeah. So my Instagram is at it's Katie DePaola, and our Instagram for IGC is at Inner Glow Circle. And you can come hang out with us on innerglowcircle.com too. We've got tons of like free workshops and uh, gifts and lots of cool stuff.
Awesome. We'll make sure that we have all the links and everything right in the show notes so that you guys can meet up with Katie online. But Katie, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing with us your path and your journey to becoming exactly who you are.
Thanks for having me.